In the last section, we used our person class to create a new instance of a person, which we assigned to the variable lowercase p person. Then on the line after that, we set a value to the first name property on that person instance. At the very end of that section, we had said that it sure seems kind of awkward to have to first declare the new instance of the person and then set the first name property after that. It sure seems to me like every person who exists inside of our application should always have a first name associated with them. So in this section, we're going to add a little bit of code to make sure that anyone who wants to use this person class right here has to provide a first name property to the class the instant that the class is created. So the instant we call new person right here. To do this kind of required setup or required configuration of our class whenever we create a new instance of it, we're going to add something called a constructor function. A constructor function is going to be another function or method added on to this class right here. This constructor function gets executed automatically anytime we create a new instance of the person class. And so it makes it a perfect location to do a little bit of initial setup or initialization of our class. So to just kind of put this into diagram format, here's what's going to go on. Anytime you and I create a new instance of a class, the constructor function is going to be called with any arguments that we provided when we try to create a new instance. That constructor function will then be executed, and it's going to do some initial setup for us. And then after all that runs, our new instance of the class then gets returned and then assigned to this person variable over here. So let's get to it. Let's define the constructor on our person class. To define a constructor, I'm going to add a little bit of space here underneath our field of first name, and then I'm going to define a new function with a very special name. So the function name is going to be person with a capital P, like so. So notice how the name of this function right here is absolutely identical to the name of the class. Because these two names are completely identical in case and spelling, so they both have a capital P, this person function right here will be used as the constructor function. And so this function will be called automatically anytime we try to create a new instance of a person. And again, that makes it a perfect location to do some initial configuration of our instance. Now, as we were saying just a moment ago, we kind of want to add on a requirement to our application. We want to say that anytime you try to create a person instance, you have to immediately provide a first name. In other words, we should not have any people inside of our application who do not have a first name. So to add in that requirement, we can specify an argument inside this constructor function's argument list, or the set of parentheses right here. So inside this set of parentheses, I'm going to write out name, like so. As soon as I type that in, you'll notice that we get an error appearing on the right-hand side over here. And if you click on it, it highlights where we were trying to create that new person instance up here. So as soon as we start to add in an argument to a function, that means that anywhere we are calling that function from needs to also provide the correct number and type of arguments as well. So in order to make sure that every person gets created with a first name, we just had to add in the argument right here, and then poof, everything else inside of our code base now says, hey, if you're going to try to create a person, you have to pass along some argument as well. Now we'll fix up this kind of new instance creation right here in just a moment, but first, let's finish off our constructor. So as soon as someone provides a name property to this constructor function, we probably want to take that provided name and assign it to the first name property. So to do so, we can write out first name equals name, like so. Now, one thing I want to point out here is that my choice of variable names is a little bit unclear. I provided a variable name or an argument name here of simply name. And so it's not super clear inside my constructor if this is supposed to be like the last name or is it supposed to be the first name of the person. It's not super clear. And so you might think, well, it would be a little bit more clear if we just wrote out first name. But then that makes this line of code a little bit less clear because this would technically be first name. And now we are in a state where things are super unclear. We've got an argument name of first name, but our property name is first name as well. So Dart understands that this right here is probably a line of code that you're going to want to write all the time. It's very common to have constructor arguments with names that are identical to the property names that you're attempting to assign them to. So rather than making you write out some very awkward code like this right here, Dart has a built-in shortcut that kind of takes care of this entire situation for us. So let's write out this shortcut, and I think you'll be somewhat happy with how this turns out. So I'm going to take the set of curly braces here. I'm going to highlight everything in between. I'm going to delete it all. I'm then going to place a semicolon after that person function. And then to first name right here, I'm going to add on this dot, like so. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on here. So this is some pretty crazy syntax, but here's what's going on. Now, anytime we create a new instance of person and pass in a first argument to that creation, Dart is going to automatically take that first argument and assign it to the first name property of the instance that is created. So normally when we see this set of parentheses after a function name, we think of it as the argument list. But Dart is instead taking this argument list and it's kind of doing a little shortcut for you. And it's saying, oh, well, since you referred to this argument as this dot first name, I'm just going to take whatever argument was passed to this new person when it was created and automatically assign it to the first name property for you. Now I'm using a lot of words to describe this, but it might not be super clear. So let's kind of complete this example, and I think it'll get a little bit more obvious as time goes on. So now back up inside of my main function, I'm going to find the person.firstName property assignment right here, and I'm going to delete the entire thing. I'm then going to find where we try to create an instance of a person right here, and I'm going to make sure that I pass in my first name property directly to this constructor function. So to this thing, I'm going to add a string of Stephen, like so. Now you'll notice that all the error messages go away. And if I try to run this thing, over here in the console, I'll see Stephen appear again. All right, let's take a quick pause right here. And when we come back to the next section, we're going to review what we've spoken about with constructors, and we'll review this little shortcut of property assignment right here. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute. In the last section, we spoke about constructor functions defined on classes. We also went through a little bit of a shortcut on assigning a property straight through the constructor without having to add any additional function code to the constructor itself. So in this section, we're going to do a quick review on what just happened, just to make sure that it's really crystal clear, because this abbreviated syntax right here of initializing a property name directly from the constructor is something that you're going to see all throughout this course and in a tremendous amount of documentation on Dart as well. So let's get to it. I put together a quick diagram to help you understand what is going on. And the first thing I want to remind you about is that you and I added a function to the class. The function's name was person with a capital P. Because that function name was absolutely positively identical to the class's name, it became the constructor function for this class automatically. Remember, a constructor function gets called automatically any time that it's been defined on the class, and it is our place to do some initialization or setup of the class instance. Inside this constructor, we specified an argument list with exactly one argument on it. Inside that argument list, we wrote out this.firstName. This means that in order for us to create a new instance of a person, we have to call newPerson and provide exactly one argument to it. So specifically because we wrote out an argument right here, that means anytime we create a new instance of a person, we have to provide one argument as well. Now the interesting thing about that argument that we listed there was that on the front of the argument name, we put on this dot, and then we wrote out a property name, or the name of a property or field that belongs to this class. Because we followed that strict rules, or because we have this dot and then exactly the field name right here, Dart decided to automatically take this argument of string Stephen right here, or whatever your name is in your case, and automatically assign it to the first name property for us. So again, specifically because we used this dot and then the exact name of the property, this got assigned to the correct property name for us. To give you a very quick demonstration of exactly how that worked, I'll flip back over to Dartpad over here. Now I want to find that constructor function, and I'm going to try changing first name right here to something else, like maybe something like my first name. And when I do so, you'll notice that I've got an error message down here. It says my first name isn't a field on the enclosing class. However, if I remove the this dot from this thing, then you'll notice that the error message goes away. So it's specifically the combination there of putting this dot and the exact property name that allows us to take this shortcut in adding this property to the class person. So I'm now going to revert that back to this dot first name, and now my code is going to work as it did before, exactly as we expect. Okay, so again, in this section, we spoke about constructors, and we spoke about this little shortcut right here for assigning fields to an instance of a class whenever we called a constructor function. And we called that constructor function by using the new keyword right here, and then referencing the class's name. So now that we've got a good overview on this, let's continue in the next section where we're going to start working on our next project that's going to heavily involve classes. So quick break, and I'll see you in just a minute.